Good afternoon, I'm Deacon Jay, and today is Sunday. It's the 21st Sunday in Ordinary Times. And several weeks ago, my extended family and I, all 21 of us, went to Norris Lake for a few days. And while we were there, I showed them our family tree, including all of our parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents. Kathleen and I worked on this family tree for about a month before that vacation, as we struggled to get the names and the dates of birth and death and pictures together for as many as we could. We were surprised to discover that most of our great-grandparents were born before the Civil War. We also discovered that her great-grandma and great-grandpa Ziegler had over 1,500 descendants, including their spouses. And we were able to find wedding pictures for many on our family tree. And in fact, for some, this was one of the few pictures we were able to find. This undertaking showed us how important family and marriage is to society and the church. Today's reading, and the second reading, is from letter of St. Paul to the Ephesians, chapter 5. It's primarily about marriage. And then the gospel today is from St. John's Gospel, chapter 6, and it's about the Eucharist. So we have these two readings that are both about life. One is about eternal life, the other one is about human life, and they're both really related to Holy Communion. The Holy Communion we receive in the Eucharist, and the Holy Communion of the marital embrace, which oftentimes can produce life. So St. Paul tells us, brothers and sisters, be subordinate to one another out of reverence for Christ. He also tells husbands, love your wives, even as Christ loved the church and handed himself over to her to sanctify her. So husbands and wives are meant to be subordinate to one another, and husbands are to sacrifice for their wives, even to the point of death. Wives are to allow their husbands to sacrifice for them. I wonder if today's husbands and wives are willing to be subordinate to each other and to sacrifice for each other. I expect that many are not willing, since so many marriages end in divorce. Because of this, many people today don't even bother to marry. They may think, why marry, since it brings so much pain and anguish? How do our marriages compare to the marriage of Christ and his church? Christ sacrificed himself on the cross for his church. Christ gives himself to us, his bride, his church, his body, blood, soul, and divinity in Holy Communion. He loves us so much that he wants to be there for us whenever we need him. He tells us, I am the bread of life. He who comes to me shall not hunger, and he who believes in me shall never thirst. He also tells us, truly, truly, I say to you, unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you have no life in you. He who eats my flesh and drinks my blood has eternal life, and I will raise him up on the last day. Jesus knew how important it would be for us to develop a personal relationship with him by consuming him in the Eucharist. Truly, he is our food for the journey. Without Jesus, the challenges of life can become overwhelming. So then, why aren't our Catholic marriages thriving, since we have the grace of the Eucharist available to us? Unfortunately, some Catholics do not even believe that the Eucharist is truly Jesus Christ's body, blood, soul, and divinity. And some are receiving it unworthily, in a state of serious sin. Also, some take the Eucharist for granted, or may believe that the bread and wine that we receive at communion are just symbols of Jesus' body and blood, and not the real thing. As Catholics, we see this miracle at every Mass. The bread and wine become the body and blood of Christ during the consecration, when the priest prays over them in the person of Jesus. This is my body, and this is my blood. As I look back on the family tree that I showed my children, I realized that almost all of our ancestors were Catholic. I wonder what struggles each of them might have had in living their faith. I also wonder how strong their marital relationships were. I pray that their married life helped them achieve their ultimate goal of heaven, and that they will greet me there someday. We all wonder how we'll ever be able to do all that's required of us in serving the Lord and sacrificing for our family. This brings us to today's gospel reading about the Eucharist. It is the end of the Bread of Life discourse in John chapter 6, which we've been reading for several weeks on Sundays. Many of Jesus' disciples said, "This saying is hard. Who can accept it?" But Peter responds, "Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life, and we have believed and have come to know that you are the Holy One of God." Peter's act of faith, then, would be an excellent response for all of us, for we all have a critical role to play in salvation history. My wife's great-grandparents numbered over 1,500 descendants and their spouses. How many will we have? What will their role be in making the world a better place and in passing on the Catholic faith to future generations? Like Peter, your faith, your acceptance of Jesus and his church, will provide the key to answering these questions. God bless.